Keep her restrained. She's actively psychotic and violent." Those were the last words my husband Merritt said to the ER triage nurse. The words hung in the sterile, over-conditioned air of the hospital, mixing with the sharp, chemical stench of industrial bleach and rubbing alcohol. He leaned down, his shadow falling over my face, blocking out the blinding glare of the fluorescent overhead lights. He kissed my sweaty forehead. His lips felt like dry ice against my feverish skin. He turned to the triage nurse, a young woman in light blue scrubs who looked entirely overwhelmed by the Saturday night chaos, and offered her a tragic, long-suffering smile. It was the exact smile he used when a student failed a test he had tried so hard to help them pass. "I just don't know what to do anymore," he whispered to the nurse, his voice catching in a perfectly engineered simulation of a sob. "She's been spiralling for months. I have to go protect my boys. Please just keep her safe from herself." "We will, sir," the nurse said softly, her eyes full of genuine pity for the handsome, grieving husband. "We'll keep her sedated. What did you say her name was again?" "Tara," Merritt said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Tara Vance." He didn't look back at me. He just turned and walked out the sliding glass doors into the humid, suffocating heat of the North Carolina night. The doors hissed shut behind him, sealing me in. I was strapped to a cold vinyl gurney. The rough, webbed nylon of the restraints bit into my wrists and ankles, chafing my skin every time I took a shallow breath. 2 of my ribs were cracked. The pain was a living, breathing entity in my chest, a jagged shard of glass that twisted deeper with every microscopic movement. My left eye was swollen completely shut, the skin stretched tight and throbbing with a dull, heavy heat from where he'd shoved me down our basement stairs exactly 1 hour and 14 minutes earlier. He had handed them Tara's North Carolina driver's license. I knew this because I had seen the flash of the plastic card in his hand before the nurse placed it on the stainless steel rolling tray next to my bed. I couldn't speak through the thick, metallic-tasting blood pooling in the back of my throat. My tongue felt like a swollen piece of lead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to thrash against the nylon belts and tell them he was lying, that he was a monster, that he was taking my 2 sons to his parents' house and deliberately leaving me here as a Jane Doe psych hold so I couldn't stop him from vanishing. I closed my good eye, the sheer, helpless panic threatening to pull me into the dark waters of unconsciousness. But 20 minutes later, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes announced the arrival of the hospital admitting Clark. She wheeled a heavy computer cart into my bay to log my vitals. She smelled of stale coffee and peppermint gum. She sighed, a tired end-of-shift sound, and picked up the ID he had left on the metal tray. She typed something into her keyboard. The mechanical clacking filled the small space. Then she looked down at my left wrist to check my pulse. Her fingers brushed against the faded, waterproof medical alert bracelet I wore. It was bright red, scuffed at the edges from years of wear, documenting a severe allergy I had registered 6 years ago, a bracelet I never took off. Her fingers stopped moving. The rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor seemed to echo louder in the cramped bay. Her face went completely white. All the colour drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax figure under the harsh lights. She looked at the plastic ID in her left hand. She looked at the red band on my wrist. She looked at my bruised, unrecognisable face. She leaned in close, the scent of peppermint washing over my face, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. This ID says you're allergic to penicillin. Whisper. Your medical band says you have a lethal allergy to latex. And the name on this plastic says Tara Vance. But the name engraved on your wrist says Zola Prentice. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the empty hallway. Who the hell just walked out of here? I tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet, choking cough. Blood bubbled at the corner of my lips. But by then, Merritt was already gone. He was driving down Interstate 77 with my children in the back seat, and he had absolutely no idea what he had just set in motion. My name is Zola Prentice. I am 35 years old, and I live in Charlotte. If you passed me in the grocery store aisle, you wouldn't look twice. I'm just another tired mum in faded black yoga pants, my hair pulled into a messy bun, pushing a squeaky cart while debating the price of bulk juice boxes and generic brand Honey Nut cereal for my 2 boys, Jude and Leo. Jude is 6. Leo is 4. They are the exact centre of my gravity. They are the reason my heart beats. To understand how I ended up strapped to a hospital bed with cracked ribs while my husband tried to erase my identity, you need to understand something fundamental about how I was raised. I grew up in a loud, chaotic, drafty house in East Charlotte. The floorboards groaned if you looked at them wrong, and the water pressure in the shower was little more than a rusty trickle. My dad walked out when I was 7, packing his things in black trash bags in the middle of the night, leaving my mum to raise 3 girls on a grocery cashier's dismal salary. We didn't have money. We didn't have new clothes or vacations, but we had a very specific, razor-sharp type of survival instinct. My great-aunt Hattie lived with us during those years. She took the small bedroom at the back of the house that always smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender. She was a woman carved out of old oak and stubbornness, her face mapped with deep wrinkles that spoke of a hard life. She used to sit on our sagging front porch in a rusted metal folding chair, smoking cheap, unfiltered cigarettes, watching the neighbourhood stray dogs fight over scraps in the gutter. I remember sitting at her feet one sticky, suffocating August afternoon when I was about 9. The air was so thick with humidity you could practically drink it. The cicadas were screaming in the oak trees, a deafening, vibrating hum. Down by the cracked sidewalk, a massive, muscular Rottweiler with a thick chain collar was barking its head off, foam flying from its jowls, cornering a skinny, battered, flea-bitten mutt against the brick wall of our neighbour's garage. I pulled my knees to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought the mutt was going to die. The Rottweiler was 3 times its size, snapping its jaws, the sound of its teeth clacking together, carrying through the heavy summer air. I started crying, the hot tears mixing with the sweat on my cheeks. "Aunt Hattie, do something," I whimpered, pulling on the hem of her faded floral dress. "He's going to kill him." Aunt Hattie didn't flinch. She just took a long, slow drag of her cigarette, the tip glowing bright orange, tapped the ash onto the wooden porch boards and said, "Watch." I watched through my fingers. The mutt didn't bark back. It didn't growl. It didn't try to make itself look bigger. It just pressed its scrawny body flat into the rough red brick, absolutely silent, its eyes locked onto the larger dog, waiting. The Rottweiler kept lunging, barking, snapping, wasting all its energy on intimidation. And the exact second the Rottweiler overcommitted, lunging forward with its chest exposed, the mutt dropped low. In a blur of desperate, silent motion, it sank its teeth straight into the Rottweiler's front ankle, clamping down until I heard a sickening crunch. The bigger dog yelped, a high-pitched scream of agony, and scrambled backward, limping and retreating down the melting asphalt street with its tail tucked firmly between its legs. The mutt just stood there, panting, licking the blood from its muzzle. Aunt Hattie looked down at me, her dark eyes piercing through the haze of blue cigarette smoke. "A cornered dog doesn't bark, Zola," she said, her voice like grinding stones. "It doesn't make a fuss. It waits for the ankle. Remember that." I didn't know it then, sitting on the sun-baked wood of that porch, but that single piece of advice would become the blueprint for the most important, terrifying moment of my entire life. I am a social worker for the county. I spend my days navigating broken homes, evaluating safety protocols, and pulling kids out of terrifying, unspeakable situations. I walk into living rooms that smell of stale beer, overflowing ashtrays, and unwashed bodies. I document the faded yellow-green of old bruises on tiny arms. I sit on stained couches and listen to the slick, practiced lies abusers tell to protect themselves. I know the exact cadence of a fake apology. I know the micro-expressions of guilt, which makes it darkly, brutally hilarious that I couldn't see the monster living in my own beautifully decorated, vanilla-scented house until his hands were physically on me. But there's something I haven't told you yet about my job. It's not the psychology degree that makes me good at what I do. It's a mundane, almost irritating human habit I possess. I am an obsessive documenter. My brain functions like a filing cabinet. I notice small discrepancies. A date on a medical form that doesn't match a school record. A receipt from a town someone swore they never visited. A shift in a narrative timeline by just 10 minutes. I keep physical records of things. I write things down. I remember every word people say to me. Every single word. It used to drive my sisters crazy when we were teenagers. But that one thing about me, that compulsive need to gather, categorize, and cross-reference data. It's the reason Merritt is currently sitting in an 8x10 concrete cell instead of living in a 4-bedroom house with my children. I met Merritt when I was 27. He was a high school history teacher. If you asked anyone in our community about Merritt Prentice, they would gush until they ran out of breath. He was the guy who stayed late on Fridays to tutor struggling kids. He was the guy who organised the neighbourhood block party, manning the grill with a spatula in one hand and a local craft beer in the other. He had this easy, golden retriever charm, a perfect smile with slightly crooked bottom teeth that made him look approachable, and a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most fascinating person he had ever spoken to. Looking back, the warning sign was right there, flashing neon red. On our third date, we went to a crowded Italian restaurant downtown. The air smelled of garlic, roasted tomatoes, and expensive wine. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of romantic conversations surrounded us. We were laughing about something my sister had said, his hand resting warmly over mine on the white tablecloth. A young waitress, maybe 19 years old, rushed past our table carrying a heavy tray of water pitchers. As she passed, her elbow bumped the edge of a chair, and a single heavy drop of ice water splashed over the rim of the pitcher, landing squarely in the centre of Merritt's phone screen, which was sitting face up near his bread plate. It was nothing, a drop of water. But Merritt's entire face transformed. The easy charm evaporated instantly. His jaw locked so tightly I could see the muscles jumping under his skin. His eyes went completely flat, devoid of all human warmth, and he looked up at this poor, trembling girl like she was an insect he wanted to crush beneath his heel. Trembling girl. His knuckles turned bone white where he gripped his fork. "Oh my gosh, sir, I am so sorry." The waitress gasped, frantically grabbing a cloth napkin from her apron to wipe the phone. Merritt didn't speak. He just stared at her with a look of such concentrated, violent hatred that the air in my lungs went cold. It lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the golden retriever mask snapped violently back into place. He blinked. The warmth flooded back into his eyes, and he let out a rich, booming laugh. "Hey, no harm done," he chuckled, snatching the napkin from her hand playfully. "It's waterproof anyway. Don't even worry about it, sweetheart." He tipped her $20 at the end of the night. When we walked to the car, I asked him about it. "You looked really mad for a second back there." "Did I?" he asked, opening my car door for me with a gentle smile. I just got a little startled. I have a ton of ungraded student essays on that phone. If it broke, my kids would kill me. I chose to see it as a quirky overreaction. I chose to believe the excuse. I should have recognised the dead, unblinking eyes of a shark circling its prey. The first 4 years of our marriage were beautiful. Or at least, the memory of them was beautiful, until I realised I was living in a carefully constructed stage play, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. I remember the smell of his coffee in the morning. Dark roast, so strong it could wake the dead, mixed with a ridiculous amount of artificially sweet hazelnut creamer. I remember him dancing in the kitchen with Jude when he was just a toddler, his stocking feet slipping on the hardwood floor, spinning my laughing son around while the cold autumn rain lashed against the kitchen windows. He used to leave little yellow sticky notes on my rearview mirror before I went to work. I would climb into my freezing car, shivering, and find his messy handwriting. "You're a superhero today." His messy handwriting. "I love your laugh. Hurry home to me." I found out later, much later, that he bought those sticky notes in a multi-pack and was writing the exact same phrases, word for word, for a woman named Tara. The shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow poison, dripping into the water supply of our marriage, so gradually I didn't notice the taste until I was already choking on it. It started with his phone. We had always known each other's passcodes. It wasn't a control thing. It was just convenience. "Hey, my hands are covered in flour. Can you text my mum from my phone?" That kind of thing. Then, one Tuesday evening in October, the wind was howling outside, rattling the loose shingles on the roof. I was chopping onions for a stew, the sharp sulphur smell making my eyes water. I reached for his phone, which was resting on the granite kitchen counter, to check the local weather radar. Before my fingers even touched the metal casing, Merritt crossed the room so fast he knocked a heavy oak dining chair over. It crashed against the floorboards with a violent bang. He snatched the phone from the counter, his chest heaving. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I dropped the knife, startled. "Just checking the radar," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my wrist. "It looks like it's going to rain, and I wanted to see if I should cover the patio furniture." "Use your own phone, Zola." He shoved the device into his pocket, glaring at me. "My phone is upstairs on the charger." "Merritt, what's wrong with you? You scared me." "I hate people touching my stuff," he hissed, picking up the fallen chair. "It's an invasion of privacy." He changed his passcode that night. When I asked him about it the next morning as he poured his coffee, he gave me this condescending, pitying look, tilting his head to the side. "You're being crazy, Zola. You're acting paranoid. I have sensitive student records on there now. Your acting counselling notes. The school requires strict security protocols. Do you really want me to get fired because you wanted to look at a weather app? I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was stressed about work. It wasn't nothing. Then came the sudden, erratic generosity. A man who usually complained about the price of organic milk and tracked our electric bill down to the cent suddenly came home with a $300 gold pendant necklace for me on a random Thursday. Just because I love you, he said, clasping it around my neck. The metal felt cold against my collarbone. Guilt gifts. I knew the psychology of them. They reeked of betrayal. But the real fracture, the exact moment I physically felt the foundation of my life crack beneath my feet, happened on a Saturday afternoon in March. The house was quiet. The low hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic sloshing of the washing machine were the only sounds. Merritt had gone to the gym. I was doing laundry, sorting darks from lights. I picked up his grey sweatpants, the soft, worn ones he wore on weekends. They smelled faintly of his cedarwood deodorant. I reached into the right pocket to check for tissues before throwing them in the wash. My fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of thick thermal paper. I pulled it out. I smoothed the wrinkles against the top of the washing machine. It was a receipt from a paediatric dentist in Huntersville, a wealthy suburb 40 minutes north of us. The receipt was dated the previous day, Friday, March 12th. The patient listed was Chloe Vance. Age, 5. Procedure, cavity filling. Total, $145, paid in cash. My stomach dropped into my shoes. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. My hands went completely numb. The hum of the washing machine suddenly sounded deafening, a roaring engine in my ears. The edges of my vision blurred. We didn't know anyone named Chloe Vance. We didn't have friends with a child by that name. No anyone named Chloe, and Merritt hadn't been to Huntersville. He had looked me right in the eye over breakfast on Friday and told me he had a mandatory teachers' union meeting all afternoon in South Charlotte. Why does my husband have a cash receipt for a 5-year-old's cavity filling in a town he didn't go to? I stood in that laundry room for 20 minutes, staring at the faded black ink on the thermal paper. My breathing was shallow and ragged. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a plate against the wall. I didn't collapse on the floor and cry. A cornered dog doesn't bark. I folded the receipt perfectly into a tiny square, walked upstairs into my home office, and placed it inside a locked, fireproof metal cash box I kept hidden in the back of my closet for emergency documents. I didn't tell him I found it. Not yet. The escalation began 2 weeks later. It was as if, once the affair started getting serious and expensive, his tolerance for my mere existence evaporated. He needed me to be the villain so he could justify his betrayal to himself. The first beat of the drum was the public disrespect. It was Memorial Day weekend. We were at a neighbourhood barbecue hosted by the Millers next door. The air smelled of sweet mesquite smoke, sunscreen, and cut grass. I was standing near the edge of the patio holding Leo, who was fussy and burning up with a mild fever because he was teething. His hot tears were soaking through the shoulder of my blouse. Merritt was holding court near the massive stainless steel grill, a sweating bottle of beer in his hand, surrounded by 3 other husbands. He was laughing loudly, telling a story about a golf game. I walked over, rocking Leo, and asked him quietly, "Hey, could you hold Leo for 5 minutes? My arms are shaking and I just want to grab a quick hot dog." Merritt stopped talking. He looked at me, then looked at his friends and let out a long, theatrical sigh. You see this, guys, he said, his voice loud enough for the entire patio to hear. She can handle a caseload of 40 broken families at work, but she can't manage one toddler for 20 minutes without having a meltdown. He turned back to me, his eyes mocking. Maybe if you spent less time micromanaging my schedule and reading your little psychology books, you'd be a better mother. The silence on the patio was immediate and suffocating. The crackle of the grill sounded like gunfire. The other husbands awkwardly looked down at their boat shoes, shifting their weight. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning, agonizing wave of humiliation that made my ears ring. I didn't say a word. I just tightened my grip on my crying son, turned around, and walked across the grass back to our house. Beat 2 was the isolation. My younger sister, Maya, was supposed to come visit us from Atlanta for a long weekend in June. We hadn't seen each other in 6 months. 2 days before she was supposed to arrive, my phone rang. "Zola?" Maya said, her voice crackling over the line, sounding confused and frantic. "Merritt just texted me. He said you're going through a severe depressive episode and the house is a total disaster and that a visit right now would push you over the edge." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles popped. The plastic casing creaked. "He said what?" "He said you're really unstable, Zola. He said you're not sleeping, you're crying all the time, and you're barely keeping it together. Are you okay?" He told me not to bring it up to you because you'd get super defensive and angry, but I was worried. "Maya, I'm fine," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "The house is spotless. I'm not depressed." "Are you sure? He sounded so worried about you." He was laying the groundwork. He was building a narrative, brick by brick, to everyone around us that I was losing my mind. Beat 3 was the replacement. I started finding the physical traces of her in my life. The cloying, sickly sweet scent of a cheap vanilla and rose perfume lingering on the passenger seat of his car when I moved it out the driveway. A long, bleached blonde hair wrapped tightly around the gold hinge of his Ray-Ban sunglasses. And then, the name. Tara. I saw it pop up on his phone screen when it was resting on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower. The screen illuminated the steamy room for just a second. Tara Vance. Can't wait for tonight. Miss you. Tara Vance. Chloe Vance. The paediatric dentist receipt. He wasn't just having a fling. He wasn't just sleeping around. He was actively funding and maintaining a second family. Beat 4 was the psychological warfare, the gaslighting of my own memory. I came down to the kitchen one morning to find a glossy brochure sitting dead centre on the marble island. It was for a women's psychiatric inpatient facility in the mountains. Next to it was a bottle of St. John's wort and a daily pill organiser. Merritt was sitting at the table, reading the news on his tablet. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight. He looked up, his expression a mask of deep, manufactured concern. "It's for your own good, Zola. You've been slipping." "Slipping? What are you talking about?" "You forgot to pay the water bill last week. You lost your car keys on Tuesday. And you left the stove on yesterday after making soup. I'm worried about your cognitive state. I think you need to talk to a doctor, or maybe take some time away at that retreat." I stared at him. I had paid the water bill early. The confirmation number was in my email. My car keys had been missing because he had moved them from the hook to the bottom of his gym bag. And I hadn't made soup yesterday. We ordered pizza. He was deliberately hiding my things and fabricating events to make me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. "I'm perfectly fine, Merritt," I said coldly, tossing the brochure into the trash can. "Merritt. Denial is the first symptom, Zola. he whispered, shaking his head. Beat 5 brought his mother, Eleanor, into the ring. Eleanor was a wealthy, pretentious woman who treated passive aggression as an Olympic sport. She came over for Sunday dinner. I had spent 3 hours in the hot kitchen roasting a chicken with root vegetables. The house smelled of rosemary and thyme. Merritt sat at the head of the table, cutting his meat with surgical precision, the silver knife scraping against the porcelain plate. Eleanor dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin and looked around my living room, her nose wrinkled as if she smelled garbage. Zola, the boys' toys are everywhere. There are blocks on the rug. This environment is just chaotic. Merritt tells me you've been struggling mentally, that you're having memory lapses. I am fine, Eleanor. The boys were just playing. She sighed, looking at me with undisguised pity. You know, dear, some women are simply too mentally fragile for motherhood, let alone raising 2 rambunctious boys while trying to hold down a stressful job. Merritt shouldn't have to carry the burden of a sick wife on top of his teaching duties. I looked at Merritt. I waited for him to defend me, to tell his mother she was out of line. He didn't. He just took a slow sip of his expensive red wine, swallowed, and said, "She's trying her best, Mum, even if her best is falling a bit short lately. We're looking into treatment options." I had the emotional range of a parking meter in that moment. I didn't snap. I didn't throw my wine glass in his face. I just chewed my dry chicken, swallowing the absolute acidic bile rising in the back of my throat. Because apparently, 6 years of marriage, 2 agonising childbirths, and paying exactly half of our mortgage wasn't enough of a commitment to earn basic human respect. Beat 6 was the spatial violation. I came home from a brutal day at work on a rainy Tuesday. The sky was the colour of bruised iron. I pulled into the driveway and slammed on the brakes. Sitting in the middle of the cracked concrete, getting absolutely soaked by the pouring rain, was my late mother's antique cherrywood writing desk. It was the desk she had left me in her will, the only piece of nice furniture I owned from my childhood. The wood was darkening, warping under the downpour. I threw the car into park and ran inside, dripping wet, my shoes squeaking on the entryway tile. "Merritt, what the hell did you do to my desk?" He was standing in the living room, casually unboxing a massive set of adjustable metal dumbbells. "I need the space for a home gym," he said, not even looking up. "That old piece of junk was taking up half the wall. You don't even use it." "It belonged to my dead mother. You put it in the rain. You didn't even cover it with a tarp." He stepped toward me, dropping a heavy metal plate onto the floor with a loud clang. His physical size, he was 6'2" and broad-shouldered, suddenly felt very apparent in the small room. "Stop being so dramatic, Zola," he growled, his voice dropping an octave. "It's just wood. You're acting crazy again. The boys can hear you screaming. Do I need to call someone? Are you having an episode?" Then came Beat 7. The catalyst. The money. I managed the daily finances, paying the electric and the groceries, but we had a joint, high-yield savings account we had been building for 5 years. The plan was to use it to put a sunroom addition on the back of the house. I logged into the banking app on a Friday morning while drinking my coffee to check the monthly interest deposit. The screen loaded. The blue and white graphics spun. The balance was supposed to be exactly $75,000. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the screen was glitching. The balance displayed was $6,800. My heart stopped. A physical jolt of pure adrenaline shot through my veins, making my hands shake so violently I almost dropped my mug. I clicked on the transaction history. Exactly $68,200 had been transferred out 2 days prior. The transaction note was brief. It simply read, "Wire transfer, T. Vance Escrow." He bought her a house. He used the money I had saved from my grueling, heartbreaking county job. He used the money we were supposed to use for our children's future, to buy a house for his mistress and her daughter. I didn't wait. I didn't strategize. The months of careful documentation, the silent endurance, the waiting in the corner, it all vanished. In that one moment, my raw, blinding rage overrode my patience. I marched to the printer, printed the bank statement, and waited for him to get home. He walked through the front door at 5:30 p.m., whistling a cheerful pop tune, shaking the rain off his umbrella. The smell of spearmint gum and wet wool followed him inside. The boys were in the living room, the loud, obnoxious sound effects of a cartoon blasting from the television. I met him at the top of the basement stairs. The door to the basement was open behind me, a dark, gaping maw leading down to the concrete floor. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice shaking so hard my teeth literally rattled in my skull. I shoved the warm, freshly printed paper directly into his chest. "Where is the $68,000, Merritt?" He looked down at the paper. His face didn't fall. He didn't blush. He didn't show an ounce of guilt or panic. Instead, his features hardened into a mask of absolute, terrifying annoyance. "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing nervously toward the living room where the cartoon played. "No, I will not lower my voice," I screamed, stepping closer to him. "You wired our life savings to Tara Vance. You bought her a house. You've been lying to me, gaslighting me, and making me think I'm crazy for months." "You don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly, trying to step past me. "It's an investment property. I was going to surprise you. With a woman you're sleeping with? A woman whose kid you take to the pediatric dentist in Huntersville." He froze. The golden retriever mask melted away, revealing the jagged, ugly truth underneath. His eyes went completely dead. The shark was back. "You went through my things?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I want my money back. I want you out of this house tonight. I'm calling a lawyer and I'm taking the boys." I turned on my heel to walk away from him. I didn't even see his hand move. He grabbed the shoulder of my knitted sweater. His fingers dug into my collarbone like iron hooks. He spun me around, his face twisted in a snarl of pure fury, and shoved me backward with the force of a battering ram. My heel caught the slick wooden edge of the top step. For a split second, there was total weightlessness. The world tilted sideways. I saw the ceiling fixture spinning above me. Then came the brutal, unforgiving physics of gravity and hard wood. I hit the third step with my rib cage. The sound was a sickening, wet crack that echoed in the tight, narrow stairwell. The air was violently expelled from my lungs in a sharp gasp. I tumbled backward, out of control, striking the back of my head against the rough drywall. My left shoulder wrenched backward, tearing the socket until I finally slammed, face first, onto the freezing cold, dust-covered concrete of the basement floor. My vision swam in a churning sea of blackness and bright red sparks. I couldn't breathe. My lungs completely refused to expand. A sharp, burning agony radiated from my chest with every frantic attempt to pull in air. Hot, metallic blood was instantly pooling in my mouth from where my teeth had bitten, straight through the soft flesh of my inner cheek. I lay there in the dim light, gasping like a fish out of water, the cold dampness of the concrete seeping into my clothes. Then I heard footsteps at the top of the stairs. Tiny, sock-covered footsteps on the hardwood. "Daddy? What was that loud noise?" It was Jude. I tried to speak. I tried to scream my baby's name. I tried to tell him to run. But only a pathetic, wet gurgle came out of my throat, followed by a thick string of bloody saliva. I heard Merritt's voice. It was perfectly calm, smooth as silk, warm and reassuring. "It's okay, buddy. Mommy fell down. You know how Mommy is just sick in the head lately? She had one of her episodes. Go back to the TV and watch your show. I'm going to take her to the doctor to get some medicine." He walked down the wooden stairs. He didn't rush. He took his time, his heavy boots thudding against the wood. He stood over me, his shadow blocking out the dim bulb from the stairwell, watching me writhe and choke on the concrete. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't ask if I was alive. He reached down, grabbed me by the bunched collar of my torn sweater, and dragged my dead weight up the stairs. My legs bumped agonizingly against every single step. I was slipping in and out of consciousness. He loaded me into the passenger seat of his car, buckling me in like a rag doll. He told the boys to get their shoes on, that they were going to Grandma's house for a sleepover. And that brings us back to the hospital, to the blinding fluorescent lights, to the triage nurse, to his grand, psychotic plan to dump me as a violent psychiatric patient named Tara Vance, while he took my children and vanished to the new house he bought with my money. If I could go back to that moment on the concrete, choking on my own blood, I wouldn't change a single thing. Because that was the breaking point. Lying there in the dark, tasting copper, listening to him calmly lie to my terrified son. That was the exact moment the victim died, and the strategist was born. A cornered dog doesn't bark. It waits for the ankle. Della, the hospital admitting clerk, stood in my bay, clutching the fake ID in her trembling hand, the scent of her peppermint gum mixing with the smell of my blood. I forced myself up onto my right elbow. The pain in my ribs was blinding, a white-hot knife twisting in my chest. I spat a thick wad of bloody saliva into a plastic suction cup resting on the tray. I looked her dead in the eye. "My name is Zola Prentice," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel grinding against glass. "The man who just left is my husband, Merritt Prentice. He pushed me down a flight of stairs. He gave you his mistress's ID so I couldn't be tracked, and he is currently trying to steal my children." Della stared at me for 3 long seconds. She was a woman in her late 50s. She had seen every shade of human darkness roll through those ER sliding doors. Shootings, stabbings, overdoses, and the quiet, insidious violence of domestic abuse. She didn't panic. She didn't run out of the room yelling for security. She didn't treat me like a psychiatric patient. She simply nodded, her face hardening into a mask of grim determination. She slid the fake ID into a plastic evidence bag she pulled from the bottom drawer of her cart. "All right, honey," Della said, her voice low and steady. "I hear you. Let's get the police down here. The quiet way." What Merritt didn't know, what nobody in the world knew, was that I had already been preparing for a war. I had found out about Tara 4 months ago, the day I found that receipt in the laundry. The paediatric dentist was just the loose thread. I had been pulling on it ever since. For 4 months, I had played the role of the silent, dutiful, gaslit wife. I had smiled through clenched teeth. I had roasted his chickens. I had let him tell me I was crazy. And every single night, while he slept soundly beside me, I had been working. I took screenshots of his text messages. I forwarded his emails to a secure, encrypted server. I tracked the GPS on his car. Encrypted server. I found the escrow documents for the house in Huntersville. I pulled the county property records. I ran a background check on Tara Vance and found out she had a history of check fraud and 2 prior evictions. I documented the $68,200 transfer. I had built a digital vault so dense, so meticulously organised, it could sink a battleship. But I didn't have proof of his physical danger to me. I didn't have the final, bloody nail in the coffin required to secure full, uncontested custody and immediate criminal charges in the state of North Carolina. It would have been a long, drawn-out legal battle. He would have fought me for the boys. He would have used his Teacher of the Year charm on a judge. Until he pushed me. Della called a specific detective she knew, a woman named Ramirez, who handled high-risk domestic violence cases. Ramirez arrived at the hospital an hour later in plain clothes, a leather jacket and dark jeans. She smelled of cheap coffee and rain. She pulled up a chair next to my bed, pulled out a notepad, and listened. I gave her everything. I gave her the timeline. I gave her the passwords to my digital vault. I gave her the fake ID. I gave her the exact address of the house in Huntersville he had bought with stolen funds. I let the hospital photographer take high-resolution photos of my swollen face, my cracked ribs, and the deep purple bruising blooming across my shoulder. He thinks I'm locked in a state psych ward on a 72-hour involuntary hold, I told Detective Ramirez from my hospital bed, wincing in agony as the attending doctor tightly wrapped a compression bandage around my ribs. He thinks nobody knows who I am. He thinks he has 3 days to disappear. Ramirez stopped writing. She looked up at me and smiled. It was a cold, sharp, terrifying smile. The smile of a predator. Let him think that, she said softly, clicking her pen shut. We are going to build an ironclad, multi-jurisdictional warrant. We are going to... And Merritt, feeling invincible, feeling like a king who had successfully conquered a new kingdom, decided this was the perfect moment to officially introduce Tara Vance to his family. He brought her. He brought my boys. I arrived at the Capitol Grill at exactly 7:45 p.m. The dinner was in full swing. I wasn't wearing hospital scrubs. I wasn't limping, though my ribs screamed in protest with every single step I took. I wore a tailored, sharp black blazer and high heels. My hair was pulled back tightly into a sleek ponytail. I wore dark, heavy foundation that barely concealed the fading, ugly yellow-green bruise surrounding my left eye. I carried a heavy canvas tote bag over my good shoulder. Inside were 12 beautifully bound, spiral presentation folders. I walked past the shocked maitre d', completely ignoring his frantic protests that the back room was reserved, and pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors of the private dining room. The room was bathed in warm, golden light from crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the rich scent of seared ribeye fat, garlic butter, and expensive red wine. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low, joyful hum of family laughter filled the air. There were 20 people seated at the long, polished oak table. Plates of medium-rare steak and lobster mac and cheese sat half-eaten. Merritt was sitting near the head of the table, holding a glass of Cabernet. Tara Vance was sitting next to him. She was young, maybe 25, wearing a tight red dress and the $300 gold pendant necklace he had bought with my money. My son Jude was sitting across from them, quietly colouring on a paper placemat. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind me with a loud final thud. Eleanor was the first to see me. She froze, her silver fork stopping halfway to her mouth. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a freshly embalmed corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Corpse. Finally, she gasped. "Zola?" The silence that rolled over the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the kind of silence that physically rings in your ears. The laughter died instantly. Forks were slowly lowered to plates. Merritt turned his head. I have seen many expressions on the faces of abusers when they realise they have lost control of their narrative. I have seen white-hot anger. I have seen frantic, stammering panic. But the look on Merritt's face in that upscale steakhouse was pure, unadulterated, primal terror. His jaw actually unhinged. His eyes bulged. His hand began to shake so violently he knocked his crystal wineglass over, sending a pool of dark red liquid bleeding across the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh crime scene. "Mommy!" Jude yelled, dropping his crayon, jumping out of his oversized leather chair and running towards me. I knelt down, wincing as fire shot through my ribs, and caught him with my good arm, burying my face in his soft hair. He smelled like apple juice and crayons. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "Mommy's here. I'm taking you and Leo home now." Merritt stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "Zola, how did you—" He couldn't form a complete sentence. He looked like his brain was physically short-circuiting, unable to process the data in front of him. "How did I get out of the psych ward?" I asked, my voice completely steady, cold as ice, carrying to every single corner of the dead silent room. "The one where you dumped me under a fake name after you shoved me down a flight of concrete stairs?" A collective, horrified gasp echoed from the aunts at the far end of the table. Tara Vance shrank back into her chair, her eyes darting toward the exit. You're crazy," Merritt stammered, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, raising his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "You're having an episode." "Everyone, listen to me. She's not well. She escaped from a facility. She's dangerous." I stood up slowly, keeping Jude safely tucked behind my legs. I reached into my canvas tote bag. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't need to bark. I just started walking slowly around the perimeter of the long table, pulling out the bound folders one by one. "I brought some reading material for dessert," I said calmly, dropping the first heavy folder directly in front of his older brother, David. Page 1 is a certified copy of the hospital admitting form where Merritt registered me under the name Tara Vance. Page 2 is a high-resolution photocopy of the fake ID he handed to the triage nurse before he abandoned me. David opened the folder. His eyes widened in horror. I took 2 steps and dropped the next folder in front of the family pastor, who was staring at me with his mouth agape. Page 3 contains the emergency room photographs of my cracked ribs, my torn rotator cuff, and my swollen face, taken 2 hours after Merritt shoved me down the basement stairs. "Merritt, what is she talking about?" his uncle demanded, his voice thick with confusion. "She faked it," Merritt shouted, sweat beading on his forehead, a vein pulsing dangerously in his neck. "She's a social worker. She has access to these kinds of forms. She's trying to ruin me because she's sick." I kept walking. I walked over to Eleanor, who was trembling in her seat, and dropped a folder directly onto her plate of half-eaten steak. "Page 4, I said, looking down at my mother-in-law, is the official bank wire transfer of $68,200 from my children's savings account. A transfer Merritt used to buy a house in Huntersville for his mistress, the woman sitting next to him wearing my jewellery." Tara Vance pushed her chair back, her face flushed dark red, looking like she wanted to melt into the floral wallpaper. "And page 5, I said, finally stopping at the head of the table, standing inches away from my husband. He smelled of fear. It was a sharp, sour scent that overpowered his expensive cologne. Page 5 is the sworn police affidavit from Detective Ramirez, confirming the active multi-felony warrant for Merritt's immediate arrest. Eleanor stared at the open folder in front of her. She looked at the brutal, undeniable photos of my bruised, unrecognisable face. Then she slowly turned her head and looked at her golden boy son. "Merritt," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Merritt, what did you do? Tell me this is a lie." Merritt was hyperventilating. His chest heaved. He looked at the faces of his family, faces that had adored him for 34 years, and saw only disgust and horror. "It's fake," he screamed, slamming his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. "She made it all up. I'm calling the police." "Actually," I said, taking one step back. "That's why I brought guests." I turned toward the mahogany doors. They swung open again. Detective Ramirez walked into the private dining room, her badge clipped to her belt, followed closely by two massive, uniformed Charlotte Mecklenburg police officers. "Merritt Prentice," Ramirez said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her belt. The metal clicked loudly. "You have a terrible habit of leaving your ID at crime scenes." The chaos that erupted was cinematic. It was a masterpiece of destruction. His aunt started sobbing hysterically. His brother David stood up and backed away from Merritt, as if he were covered in gasoline and holding a match. Eleanor slumped forward, burying her face in her trembling hands, weeping loudly. Merritt didn't fight the cops. He didn't try to run. The arrogance, the smugness, the golden retriever charm, it all completely evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, hollow shell of a man. Completely evaporated as the officers grabbed his arms, spinning him around and violently yanking his wrists behind his back to snap the cuffs shut. He looked over his shoulder at me. His eyes were wide, wet, and pleading. "Zola, please," he begged, his voice a pathetic whine. "Please. The boys. Don't do this in front of the boys. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You did this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but I knew he heard it. "I'm just delivering the receipt." I gathered Jude and Leo. I didn't look back as the officers marched him out through the kitchen service doors, past the staring line cooks, reading him his Miranda rights over the din of the restaurant. I walked out the front entrance of the Capitol Grill, the cool, refreshing night air hitting my face. My children held my hands tightly, safe, unharmed, and entirely mine. The cascade of consequences was swift, brutal, and absolute. Within 2 weeks, Merritt was formally indicted by a grand jury. The school board fired him, and the state revoked his teaching licence instantly when the felony charges of assault, wire fraud, and identity theft hit the public record. Tara Vance flipped on him the exact second she realised she might face accessory charges. She sat in an interrogation room and gave a full, tearful, 4-hour deposition detailing exactly how he had bragged to her about dumping me at the hospital and stealing the money. Eleanor tried to call me once, 3 weeks later. She left a long, tearful, rambling voicemail begging to see her grandsons, apologising profusely for calling me fragile, claiming she didn't know what a monster her son was. I didn't call her back. I simply forwarded her an email containing a PDF of the final custody order. The judge had granted me 100% sole physical and legal custody, with a permanent, lifetime restraining order against Merritt. As for the $68,200, because the funds were marital assets stolen under fraudulent pretenses to buy the Huntersville house, the judge ordered the immediate liquidation of the property. I got every single penny back, plus a hefty sum for legal fees and emotional distress. Tara Vance was evicted with 30 days' notice. It has been a year since that night at the steakhouse. We don't live in the house with the dark basement stairs anymore. I sold it and bought a smaller, beautiful, sunlit townhouse on the north side of the city. There are large windows. There are no shadows here. This morning, I woke up early. The house was perfectly quiet. I walked into my bright kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. Dark roast, black. Absolutely no hazelnut creamer. I walked out onto the small wooden patio and watched the sun rise over the tall Carolina pine trees, painting the sky in vibrant strokes of orange and pink. Jude and Leo were asleep upstairs in their beds, safe, secure, and entirely mine. I leaned against the railing, feeling the cool morning breeze against my face, and I thought about Great Aunt Hattie. I thought about the smell of her cigarette smoke, the heat of that August day, and the scrawny, bleeding dog backed into the corner. People think revenge is loud. They think it's about screaming matches on the front lawn, throwing clothes out of a second-story window, and smashing car windshields with baseball bats. It isn't. True revenge is quiet. It's methodical. It's surviving the absolute worst thing someone can possibly do to you, breathing through the pain, collecting the evidence while they sleep, and dismantling their entire existence without ever raising your voice. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The bitter, rich liquid warmed my chest. It was the best thing I had ever tasted.